have been going through a series called The Witnesses, and this Pastor Mark set us all down in staff meeting and asked us which one that we wanted to pick and what day we wanted to preach. So I have drew Pilate, and even though this is Palm Sunday, I'd like for us to go a little further down in the week to Thursday or Friday and see what we can find out about Pilate. Always when I talk to my kids, we always tell the story and tell different parts that were significant, but then I always like to say to them, so what? What does that story have to tell us today? So I'm hoping that from looking at some of the things that Pilate pondered about, that we can ask ourselves some questions that will help us. We're going to begin in Matthew in verse 11. Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "You have said so," Jesus replied. When he was accused by the chief priest and the elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate asked him, "Don't you hear the testimony they are bringing against you?" But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge, much to the great amazement of the governor. Now it was the governor's custom at the festival to release a prisoner by the crowd. At that time, they had a well-known prisoner whose name was Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, "Which one do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" For he knew it was out of self-interest that they had handed Jesus over to him. When Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message: "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." But the chief priest and elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and have Jesus executed. "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" asked the governor. "Barabbas," they answered. "What shall I do then with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" Pilate asked. They all answered, "Crucify him." "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." All the people answered, "His blood is on us and on our children." Then he released Barabbas to them, but he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. We know, as far as the timeline goes, that Jesus was arrested sometime around midnight on Thursday. The gospel writers stress that he was brought before Pilate in the early morning hours on Friday. They tried to pin a charge of blasphemy on him. Blasphemy was punishable by death, and that's really what they wanted. They just wanted him to be killed. They weren't interested in a trial, much less a fair trial. But there was only one hitch. The Jews could condemn a man to death, but they weren't allowed to carry out this part of the sentence. The Romans had taken that right away from them. So before Jesus could be put to death, Pilate had to agree to it. During Pilate's interaction with Jesus, he asked him several questions. Questions I think that we would have some benefit from asking ourselves today. The first question that Pilate asked Jesus was, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Are you the king? This was the accusation that they were bringing against Jesus, is that he had been saying he was the king. So in the Ponderings of Pilate, we guess that he's just trying to figure out all the story here, what all the facts are. If the first question we ask to ourselves is, "Are you my king?" does that change the answer? And even if it doesn't change our verbal answer, do our actions and our attitudes line up with the fact that Jesus is my king? Make no mistake, whether we honor him as king or not, he is the king. His status doesn't change depending upon how we feel about him, but our status does. We can either be an heir of the throne and a joint heir with Jesus, or we can stand by and we can be an observer, but he's still going to be the King of Kings. The second question that Pilate asked is, what is truth? Now, lots of different people have looked at this, and people much smarter than us, and they don't really know why Pilate asked that question. They don't know if he really had a desire to know the truth. They don't know if he was mocking Jesus. this was just a question of ignorance, whether he was irritated or indifferent. We don't know, but Pilate asked him, "What is the truth?" What difference would it make if we ask ourselves this second question? Do I know and do I live by the truth? Again, it's one thing to say that we know the truth. It's another thing to say that we do our very best to live by the truth. Does the truth make a difference in our lives? Remember that on that Friday, Jesus died on the cross so that we could have this truth, so that we can live in the freedom and the light that that truth brings. We don't have to be in bondage due to our ignorance or another people's set of standards that aren't God's standards. We have the chance for the truth to be revealed to each and every one of us. The third question Pilate asked is, "What shall I do then with Jesus?" It was the question of a desperate man. He knows what he should do, but he's really afraid to do it. Pilate wanted to release Jesus, but without any cost to him personally. He wanted to let him go without having to take a personal stand. He allowed those around him to influence his decision. He knew the truth, but he couldn't stand up to the pressure of the voices who were speaking so loudly to him. What does our answer look like when we ask ourselves the question, "What am I doing with Jesus?" What do we do with Jesus, this man that loved us so much that he endured the pain and the death and the cruelty on the cross and then rose again so that he can be our Savior? What do we do with that? Pilate made a choice that affected all of history. And each day we're faced with the same challenges. We don't know how our decisions are going to affect the future generations. Many times there are only two possible answers, and these are the same that Pilate had. I can crown him, or I can crucify him. Sometimes there's no middle ground. Hopefully, we can learn from the wrong decision of Pilate. This season and every season, we want to choose Jesus.